my name is Sudha Nandagopal, and I am the CEO of Social Venture Partners International. And I have been working with a variety of giving circles and giving projects and doing power building work over the last several decades of my career. And so I'm excited today to have a conversation about how giving circles can have a power analysis and actually can help build power for frontline communities.
Hi there, it's nice to see you. My name's Seiji Carpenter. I am a member of a giving circle called Radfund. And we have kind of had a lot of conversations at Radfund about power. And I'm excited today to talk specifically about some of our thoughts about power in general, but in particular power sharing, how to kind of share power, as well as some about how to build power and how to use giving circles as a vehicle for that. So to get us started, let me ask you, when you kind of think about power in the broadest sense, what do you think about? What does power mean to you?
Thanks. So I think for me, when I think about power in the broadest sense, a lot of this is that our world is organized with various mechanisms of power. And particularly in the US context, the structures that determine who is perceived as having kind of formalized power are those who are the ones who've historically benefited from the system. So I think a lot about kind of what are the big institutions and systems at play in our lives, and then who has the ability to change those systems, to imagine new systems, and to actually implement those systems. So that's where I sort of define power. And of course, in the US, that often means that people with economic wealth and racial backgrounds, particularly those of folks who are white and white identifying, are the ones who hold the most power in those formal structures. But I think it's also important to recognize that in my definition of power, there's actually a lot of other forms of power that just aren't formally recognized in the same way. And so there's also a whole system of power that exists within communities who have been left out of systems, and ways in which people can sort of influence systems from the outside in or from the inside out based on those other forms of power.
When we started thinking about this, I kind of remember like an intro to Soc class where power was defined as the ability to produce a desired result, which, I think still kind of like resonates with me. And, I think more colloquially, it's like, how much do you have the ability to get your way? And I think
Right.
You kind of outlined a lot of the dynamics that really affect that, whether you have wealth privilege or class privilege or racial privilege or other types of advantages and privileges that mean that just in day-to-day life, in your lived experience, you get what you want more or less often. So I think it's kind of it gets into all parts of our lives, but I think in particular, as we start to think about giving, it's an important lens, because a lot of what we're trying to do, at least we are trying to do as a giving circle, is to help parts of our community that don't always get what they want to get more of what they want. And I think ultimately things like power building and power sharing are just ways of doing that.
Yeah, and I think, to build on that, I would say as a giving circle, there's sort of been a history, in many of our communities, and certainly I know in mine growing up, that there was a value around generosity and this idea of the haves and the have-nots, and that you contribute and are part of solving and supporting others in your community, right? But then I think about the other ways in which, for instance, my family, growing up in Spokane, Washington, we would organize to help and support other immigrant families. it wasn't with this sort of like, I'm coming in with something to save you mentality that often I think comes up in philanthropy, or even if it's not fully conscious thought, like there's sort of this, I have something that nobody else has, so I'm gonna give it away and I'm gonna feel better about that. And so I think just as I hear you talking, one of the things I'm thinking a lot about is how are giving circles, and we talk about this in social venture partners, how are we doing more than writing a check? That really it's not just about our own generosity, which is a very sort of individual self focus, but it's about being part of a collective and sharing power, not only with other people who have wealth, who are the other folks making up your giving circle, but also sharing power with the folks who are going to do the work that you are trying to influence and make happen. And it's really, that's where it becomes this, why I think that our original point about everybody has different power and different expertise becomes really important, because we don't, I think we're trying to disrupt the notion that philanthropy has held that those who write the checks have all the expertise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very well put. I think when I think about kind of the concepts of power building and power sharing, I guess I think about power sharing kind of in contrast to the value that you are articulating around generosity, which is, maybe a little bit unusual, but I often think of generosity as like, what am I willing to give?
Right.
And power sharing is very much about, it's more focused on the recipient, and it's more focused on, if ultimately my goal is for you to get more of what you want, not more of what I think you should have, or more of what, all people deserve, or more of what, our societal contract dictates, but like more of what you want, which I think in some ways is kind of a radical notion. But if that is ultimately the goal, then giving you the power to get that, to determine what it is and to get it, is obviously going to be more effective than me trying to kind of guess at it. And so when I think about power sharing, it is very much about letting the folks who have disproportionate need to have more of the tools to meet those needs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree, and I would love, to kind of put an underline on this idea that power sharing is about relationship, right? And I think sometimes generosity does not involve relationship, right? I can be generous by giving money to someone that I see every day, but never interact with. And I have no relationship to that person. I have no depth with that person. Power sharing involves me getting outside of my bubble and being alongside folks who are impacted by the system to ask, how am I a part of creating that system, and how am I willing to give up and recognize that we have shared humanity, and we have an opportunity for building together something that is more just ultimately for both of us, right? And I think that's the key thing about power sharing, is it gets you out of this mindset that this is me doing something for someone else, and it gets you into the mindset of this is me doing something for the community of which I am part of, and it is both about me and not about me at the same time.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about related to power sharing is the question of like, are donors ever wrong? Like, are you ever in the wrong as a person who's giving away money? Because I think in the kind of more traditional framework, the answer is no. Like, you're giving, and like giving is a generous act, and if you give less, that's like still okay because it's still an act of generosity. But I think in a power sharing model, it is very much about you partnering with other members of the community to shift power where there's an imbalance. I mean, where there's folks who lack the power that they're entitled to.
Yeah. So I would love to hear, just in your experience of being part of a giving circle, what has it felt like for you to have that power sharing analysis and to be in a giving circle that brings that forward?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the kind of lived experience of like what that looks like is just asking yourself harder questions and having more conversations about it, frankly. I think it's like trying to push yourself to be more deliberate and thoughtful about the power dynamics of the relationships that you have with folks that you support, about power dynamics within the giving circle, and about what you can do as a giving circle to address those. And so we can talk a little bit about some of kind of the techniques later, but I think for us, it really has felt we've kind of come into these conversations in very different places. Some of us from, organizing backgrounds that were very heavy on power analysis and understanding dynamics. And some, frankly, from folks who had never heard the phrase power analysis and had never really thought about it in those types of terms. So I think it's been kind of a big part of our growth as a group, is putting all that stuff on the table. Because I think we all, whether we acknowledge it or not, we all see it in different ways. But having those conversations out loud is pretty new for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, and I'm maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but curious. I see for sure that a lot of folks, the motivation initially to start a giving circle, I know for myself, of doing something in the collective has been, I wanted to do something with my friends, and I wanted to have conversations that I wasn't necessarily having in other places. And I'm curious to hear, one of the things I hear sometimes from folks is like, this is so much. Like, I just wanted to get together with a group of people and have good community impact. And my personal experience is that when I bring a power analysis to the work, it's way more fulfilling and it's interesting. And ultimately we have more fun because the folks in the giving circle, as well as the people who we are connecting with, we end up having so much deeper relationships. And things that spin off as a result of what we do together. I'm curious to hear if that's similar to your experience. How have you felt like this has really been additive and joyful, frankly, in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, no, I think that gets right at it, because I think we didn't really start from a place of joy. Our initial conversations were seeing a lot of injustice and inequality in the world and feeling like we wanted to do something. We wanted to do something financially, but we didn't want to do it the way that a lot of people have, typically give, which is, you respond to an email, you click on donate at 10 p.m. on your personal email alone in a room. And it's like not an experience of joy. It's like an experience of like fulfilling an obligation or, duty or maybe a little bit of generosity. But I think so much of our lived lives are in these social communities of these groups of friends that we do so much with. And, I personally have kind of shared so much of my adult life with. And then this big, profound civic action of giving was something that I was doing alone in kind of not a fun way and certainly not a communal or social way. And so giving circles very much kind of gave us the opportunity to hang out as a group of friends first and foremost, with a charge, with a kind of goal. But what that has become has been a way to have affirmative, hopeful, optimistic conversations about how to make change as a group of friends. And I think power sharing is very central to that because of these conversations about power, because of the conversations about like, it is not right that people on my block vary from, having all of the life opportunities they could want to struggling to put food on the table.
Right.
And having conversations about like what the best way is to try to help some of those folks who are struggling more to get what they want, not just the needs that I can see from next door, but to kind of equip them with the tools to to kind of shift resources for themselves. And those conversations, certainly are, I think, as you said, a lot sometimes, and they can be challenging. But I think they also are, they have become a type of home, a type of place that we continue to return to. And I mean, one thing that I would just add to that is our giving circle has I think kind of an unusual model in this way, which is that we, through our conversations about how we wanted to share power, we decided that as a group, we would kind of model what we think is right for the world, which is that each person gets kind of one vote, but people give according to their economic power. And so we each give kind of a percentage of our income and wealth. So that means for some of us, we're giving thousands of dollars, and for some of us, it means we're giving a couple hundred. But we're kind of all equal members in decision making and in the kind of management and operations of the group.
Yeah. I mean, that's very akin to many of the social venture partners international, where they have shifted to having a approach where people can give as much as something that's personally significant, but they have the same decision-making capacity within the group in terms of who their investees are and how they partner with those investees. And I think people, that's a really important first step, right? Because I often think about power as it relates to the bigger system. And if you look at the larger system of philanthropy, that's so rare to see that sort of even within in a small situation, some, people putting in different amounts and of wealth and then still having the same voting capacity, that it just is a counterbalance to a lot of what people experience in the world. And I think, for me, a lot of the sort of meta level importance of giving circles is to demonstrate small experiments of what we believe should exist in the world. And it means, I think, to hold it with some level of grace that it won't be 100% every time. But the collective, if we have multiple giving circles doing different experiments around power sharing, that collective then becomes a counterbalance to a larger system that really doesn't share power. And that, to me, is really, an exciting aspect of bringing this power analysis into giving circles.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I think, this idea that the folks who kind of understand community need the most are those who are closest to that need. Whether you kind of call it, frontline communities, or, I think they used to be called vulnerable populations. But yeah, the kind of idea that there are some folks who are living these challenges every day, and there are some folks who are, some amount of geographic or social distance from them. And giving circles do seem like an opportunity to get a little bit closer, to be like a little bit more on the ground, a little bit more of, your neighbors who have some resources to share, rather than the big foundation. And, for us in like Midtown Manhattan, that, for a community in Corona, Queens, just like feels like so far away, even though it's, you know, a half an hour subway ride.
Well,
But yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think just on that, like the idea of proximity, which I've shared and is a driving theme at Social Venture Partners, is, you know, I think we've often thought of proximity as being about geographically proximate. So if I live and work in Seattle and I give in Seattle, then I am proximate to Seattle. And I think part of what the power sharing opportunity and the power analysis in a giving circle allows for is an understanding that you can actually you can be deeply proximate, even if you don't necessarily live side by side. So, and it's really asking that question of, okay, so if I am a donor who wants to give internationally, how can the mechanism of a giving circle help me develop proximity with, for instance, work in India? And I think that's where, you know, the collective of a giving circle, to have the different vantage points that can come into that, to have sort of the spaciousness of conversation and the richness of co-developing an understanding of problems and issues, not just going one organization at a time, is such a critical element of bringing that power analysis into the work and then doing something different with it. So it's because I think this shortcut of local equals close is increasingly not true, particularly as we look at issues of racial justice in the US. You know, how do I get truly proximate when our cities are hugely segregated due to land use codes, right? So I think we have to start asking ourselves what other ways allow us to become proximate. And I think that's where relationship becomes such a key part. And to truly have healthy relationships, it means, you know, my close friends, we don't wield our economic power with each other in the way a donor does with an organization in classic giving, right? And so that's really the kind of stripping bare all of the trappings that we put upon ourselves to be in that depth of relationship allows for proximity in a whole new way. And that's, you know, I think that's where the joy comes in. And I think about, you know, I can say that I have a movement home in the immigrant rights movement because I have worked to have that kind of proximate depth of relationship with those communities. And I think the donors who do that, have that opportunity, are the donors who are really valuable to the movement too. Because they become trusted advisors. They can see aspects of the system potentially that can be changed. They can think about other ways other than just writing a check, that they can influence those systems. These are all things that we can do with the power that we have. And I think it takes that sort of understanding we're actually all part of a community to make some of those changes, not that some of us are up in an ivory tower and others are doing the work.
Yeah. As a way of kind of like trying to get at a little bit of the goals of power sharing,
yeah,
can you kind of speak to either real or hypothetical, like what does it look like, or what would it look like when power sharing is like done perfectly versus when it's not done at all? Like how does that end up?
Yeah.
You know, like at the extremes, like how does that shape a different world?
Right. I mean, I think it's hard to speak in the extremes, right? But, you know, I'll say from the examples I know, power sharing, when done well, to what we've been talking about, builds relationships, creates new ideas and imagined futures that people didn't have prior to coming together, and creates the spaciousness for that kind of creativity to blossom in a space. And I think is how, you know, some of the really bold movements for change have happened, not only in the US, but around the world, is because people had that sort of commitment to each other, commitment to community, commitment to dismantle the ways in which the system might sort of set people at different levels. So I don't know if that's too abstract as an answer, but I think, on the other side, when it's not working, is frankly a lot of what we've seen happen in the US, right? Where there are countless studies that show that small, localized work is incredibly innovative and is the work that needs to happen more. And yet the funding continues to go to the large institutional players because they have the access and the ability to go get that funding. And so the outcomes that we're ultimately getting to don't actually change the system that's creating the problems in the first place. And, I think about, so much of why social venture partners exists is to say, hey, we should not be, we've always had a principle around giving general operating support. So, as a sort of really simple first step for giving circles, make sure that you give multi-year general operating support and work in partnership to understand what outcomes are going to be evaluated rather than coming in and saying what outcomes need to happen. And I think in a lot of cases, what we've seen is foundations have driven the policy agenda of movements, which has not allowed for the sort of bigger systems change to happen. And now we're seeing a whole shift, right? Because of COVID-19, people are beginning to kind of say, oh my gosh, we have to change how this has been operating. And certainly there's been a conversation for the last couple of years, but I do think giving circles are one of the mechanisms to do that faster and to demonstrate that, a more accountable relationship. Because if you actually know the people, it's way easier for, someone who is working in a small organization or trying to build a small new project to come to you directly and say, hey, that's not working. That's a lot harder to do when you're trying to figure out like where in a major foundation or other entity you have a point of influence.
We only, I think, have a few minutes left, but I think you started to touch on the kind of question of how some of the kind of tactics and tools, and I just wanted to, so you kind of mentioned giving to operations budgets and multi-year grants, which are also things that we have done with Radfund. And yeah, I think that those things have been, when we first started, they were not immediately intuitive. I think you kind of, when we started as a giving circle and started as being donors, the advantages of giving over a longer time period and giving without kind of donor input about what the money is used for wasn't clear. The benefits of that weren't clear. Can you talk a little bit about kind of why those things, like what those accomplish?
Sure. I mean, I think at a high level, a multi-year grant is something that allows the spaciousness that true systems change work needs. So if that's the goal, which I think is what both of us are suggesting, then you have to have longer timeframes. You have to give people spaciousness. 1 year, the calendar year is an artificial time frame under which to work. And then the general operating support piece is really critical as we think about, foundations are going through their own challenges to sort of be able to do general operating support, and they have, institutions have their own set of challenges around that. But as individuals, we have the flexibility. And so I think it's really important that we give with flexibility, because honestly, on our end, it shouldn't make that much of a difference. And it is an act of trust to say, I trust and I will roll up my sleeves and be a partner to you in this work. But I trust that you understand the work you're doing. I trust your expertise. And I think that is in and of itself a really important individual donor practice, right? Because as you have more wealth, our system right now says that you are the expert. And so we get very conditioned to experiencing the world as experts. And it is a deconditioning to instead say someone else has expertise. And frankly, they do, right? If I am on the job daily trying to do this work, trying to figure out solutions, I'm the one who's out talking to people, listening, having the whole ecosystem. I have expertise. And allowing me to, pay my staff and have a salary are things that individual money can do. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I was nodding along to a lot of it. I would add a couple other things kind of in from the tactics bucket. I mean, one other thing kind of on the multi-year grants is that, to your earlier point, if part of what we're trying to do is build relationships, is to build, some kind of cross-power relationships, it's really hard to do that in like a one-time donation. Like that's, and frankly, if like you try to get a relationship out of a one-time donation, then I think that there's a cost to that as well. Sure. So a lot of our goal with part of our thinking around the multi-year grants has been both because it kind of provides organizations stability and predictability, as you talked about, but also because if we are really trying to build partnerships, those take a long time, and so we really, we kind of go into each giving cycle with the expectation that we're going to continue giving to the groups that we've supported in the past, unless something has changed dramatically about them structurally. And I think that gets to kind of one of the other ways that we try to share power, which, has to do with kind of some of the outcomes that you talked about. Is that we really view the burden of proof not on the groups that we support, but on ourselves. That essentially, to determine whether a group kind of needs funds, we try to do as much, if not all of that research and due diligence on our own without asking for time or attention from the groups themselves. Because I think in an ideal world, we would be able to, really kind of be doing all of the work and then just offering financial support without any required work. Because I think we just know very clearly that any work that they are doing for us, the donor, is work that they are not doing on the cause.
Right.
And, I think that's something that we think about a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's an important first step. And then I think you can expand it, though, and also allow for the spaciousness. I was originally a grantee of SVP Seattle in my previous role, and they asked me to come in and present to their environmental committee of donors. And what was really interesting to me in that moment is, yes, was that extra work for me? For sure. But what it allowed me to do was to connect and to build relationship with an audience to help them better understand how my work was situated, and also for them to understand as individuals living in the city of Seattle how they could influence and be in solidarity with my work. And so I would encourage us, as we're thinking about power sharing, to be careful not to create false barriers. We definitely don't want to force people into doing a bunch of reporting that's unnecessary, but I think the relational piece, the idea of you all taking the reporting work and the research work hopefully gives then space for more of the relational work. which ultimately
Absolutely.
helps transform our communities.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think for anyone thinking about starting up a giving circle, to do that self-power audit, and then also to understand what is the power analysis of our giving circle, and to know like everyone has a starting point. So it doesn't have to be perfect from the jump, but there are lessons to be learned from what you've all been doing. There's lessons to be learned from what SVP has been doing and countless other giving circles. So how do we build all of that together to create really a playbook for a different way of giving? That's what I think is exciting about bringing that analysis in.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of approaching our time, but do you want to close with any kind of final words of advice for new giving circles or potential giving circles?
Yeah, I think, so the advice I would give are a couple things. One is to get clear about why, both on the sort of meta level, why are you coming together as a giving circle, but also specifically, like, what aspect of the existing power dynamics of our system are you hoping to challenge? Bite off what you can chew to start, and then allow the giving circle process and the work that you do together to change you. The story I always hear from people who do giving in collective, and the experience I've had, is that it's changed me, it's changed my relationships. But if I tried to put those outcomes out there in the beginning, I wouldn't have been able to predict, nor would I have done the right work. So I think that's what I would say from the outset, is write some of those things down and then get into it. Spend the time, enjoy it, and learn from others, because there is a lot of learning out there to pick up on and to get going. How about you?
Yeah, I think very, very similar. I mean, one of the phrases that I think about a lot is just like to live in the questions.
Yeah.
And I think, to some extent, a lot of what giving circles offer is just the luxury of being able to do that. You get to sit with your friends and ask hard questions of yourselves, but also of like your community and society, and talk with your friends about those things. And I think that there's some real beauty in that. I think there's some kind of, it can be truly joyful to go deeper and to have epiphanies about dynamics that you either didn't see before, or you like saw but just didn't name. And then once you name them, there's so much more that you can see around them. So I guess my main advice would be to enjoy the evolution. I think similar to what you said, that you do, we started Radfund in 2015, and in the last 5 years, the way that I think about giving, the way that I think about, the social justice movement, and the way that I think about Brooklyn has like pretty radically changed. And it's been a pretty wonderful ride.
Yeah. Well, this was great. I'm so glad we got a chance to catch up.
Yeah.
And good luck to everyone who is thinking about starting up a giving circle. We're excited for that. So hopefully we'll see even more examples of interesting power sharing going on with giving circles.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.